Hello to my network. This is my foray into creating online lectures. I am a lifelong instructor. I've been teaching all kinds of technical and non-technical content over the many years. I'm an MCT, that is Microsoft Certified Trainer. I've been teaching everything from end users to developers to architecture and everything in between. And my intention here is to cover a whole bunch of topics. I thought the one I use every day and I've been talking about in conferences and community events and so on is Microsoft 365, and in particular I'm excited about Microsoft Loop. There are probably tons of material out there on YouTube and other channels, but I use it every day and I use it in so many different ways that I thought I may have some to add here. Hopefully you take something away from this interaction. I'm going to start with Microsoft 365 first, and that is space that has been changing on an ongoing basis. Let's start by looking just at the URL there. You can see that it has transformed into m365.cloud.microsoft. A lot of the M365 components have been gradually migrating from the different URLs that they had into the top level domain here. You can see we don't have Microsoft.com anymore. It's actually just .microsoft, and everything is under cloud here. So that's something worth noting. I hope they don't change it one more time, but that's essentially something to keep an eye on. And then on the left-hand side here, you will see that we've got a bunch of apps. This is customizable, and I have customized it. As you can see, there's the apps button under which I have OneNote, Loop, Teams, my Outlook, and my admin center. Because I'm an administrator, you may not see this unless you have admin rights to your tenant. So apps here, you can see if you click on it, you get a bunch of apps, the standard Excel, Word, etc. And then depending on your settings, if you have a managed device that you're running on, you probably have predefined set of apps that your organization allows you to access, and that would be a limiting factor on how much you see over here. So those are the apps. So from here you can simply come and either click on it to open it, or you can pin it, which will add it on the left hand side here, and you can organize these by going up and down. You simply drag this up and it's gonna move level up, or however many levels you decide to drag it. It's just a matter of preference and prioritizing, and that can be a bit challenging. You can obviously zoom out in your browser, and that will allow you to see more, or zoom in and you'll see less, and then you have to scroll down to see the things you just added, and unpinning it will obviously remove it from there. Happenstance, I clicked on Clipchamp and Loop are those apps that sit on top of what we call Microsoft SharePoint embedded, if that matters to you. But the content of Loop, which I'm going to be spending the next little while talking about, is stored in SharePoint Embedded, which is a new partition that they created in addition to the traditional SharePoint, on top of which Microsoft Teams and the SharePoint web app sits, and also OneDrive is another partition. And now we have a third partition that we call SharePoint Embedded, into which they shove all the Loop components, and I'm going to be discussing that a bit more down the road. First things first, let's take a look at Loop. What is Loop? You may have heard about Loop a lot, or not a lot, depending on what circles you walk in, but I'm going to step back here a little bit and show you Loop from an end user perspective. It is actually in your face every day, whether you know it or not. So I'm going to skip over to Microsoft Teams, which is something you probably all use in your daily interactions. And in Microsoft Teams, you will notice that when you start a new chat, down here, there is something called Loop components. And if you click on that, you end up getting this nice little plugin that has a whole bunch of things that hopefully by the end of the series, it is going to be a series because there is a whole lot to cover in this Microsoft Loop as a product, which I'm really excited about. And I'm going to spend a lot of time maybe going over some of the same things again, simply because it makes sense. But what you will notice here is, as you can read probably, share ideas on Loop, blah, blah, add content, and also mention people. So if I go here, this is test, and I am going to go ahead down here and put the @ and you can see it shows all the people that are in my organization. It also shows other stuff like components coming from Microsoft Word, etc. So you can actually insert files inside of this component. So if I were to go plug in this, for example, in here, you can see that I will put in a link to an Outlook calendar event that I attended a while back, and this happened to be in my calendar. Another thing you can do in Loop is if you hit /, as you can see, you will be able to add a whole bunch of things, and this is really the key. Literally, that's the key to opening up this whole universe of pluggable components that you can insert in here. And as you can see, as I scroll through, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can choose from. For example, a task list. This essentially puts in a component in here that is stored within Planner, which is another Microsoft product that's awesome that you can use in order to organize tasks and so on, assign them to your team or to yourself. I use it all the time to assign tasks to myself. Things like callouts, things like code, Mermaid, I'm really excited about, and I'm gonna spend probably a session or two just on Mermaid because it's a fascinating tool. If you're a developer, you probably use Mermaid JS, and that's what it's based on. So there's a Loop and how it's, as I said, in your face within Teams. The other product that has Teams prominently featured is Outlook, the one we can't live without, obviously, the primary productivity tool for communications. If you pop that out when you create a new message, you probably noticed what I'm doing there. So I'm just gonna stick to creating a new message here. And within that message, if you go and select this little icon here, you can see that it says, hey, this is how you add that loop. Capture that image in your head. You can see that it looks like a little loop. And that is the branding over here, obviously. And as you can see, if I were to bring my cursor into the message here, this is the body. And within the body, I go and click Loop, and as you can see, it creates a very similar experience to what you just saw when I was working within the Teams chat. Teams, Outlook, as you can see, have Loop components as a native first-class citizen, if you like, within the message or within the chat, as you saw a few minutes ago down here, right? As Microsoft says in some of their reports back in the day, I don't know if it's still the same, but 70 to 80% of the functionality available to us in Microsoft Office, Word, Excel, Outlook, and probably Teams are not utilized. We only tend to use probably roughly 20%, 20 to 30% of the features that they cram into these products, and we are grateful for them, but sometimes there are just too many to choose from, decisions, and unless you were trained or you had a need for it, you probably just glanced over it. The new kid on the block is Copilot. Obviously, you probably noticed or not, but the browser here at the very top, the name of the site for Microsoft 365 is actually being rebranded as Copilot. There's a similar experience between the web and the thick client, as we used to call it, and that applies, by the way, to Teams and Outlook. As you can see here, although I am running in the browser, you have that rich, thick client-like experience or rich client experience in here because Microsoft has migrated a lot of these products to React apps, essentially, which are web applications which make sense, and they put a wrapper around it for the particular platform that you're running on, whether you're running on mobile as rich an experience, iOS or Android, and so on and so forth. Also Windows and BSD Unix, i.e. Apple Mac or iOS on Mac runs on top of BSD Unix. The experience is seamless irrespective of what platform you run on, and that is thanks to this web-based React interface that we have. And having said all that, what is Loop? As I demonstrated real quick here, Loop essentially is a component that looks the same, stored within SharePoint embedded. We'll get to that down the road. And it is highly portable. But also it is centralized in one location, meaning if you had to share a Word document with someone, they can save it locally, modify it, and then suddenly it's a completely different version than the one you originally shared. Even if you use the new best practices with Microsoft, let's say Outlook, where when you insert an attachment, basically you have multiple options. One of them happened to be OneDrive, and that is where people should actually store items and share them from there. That way there is some level of version control, but still there is some level of control on using this approach. In Microsoft Teams, you don't actually get an option to attach as we would in Outlook. Here you can browse this computer and attach a file, and that will still be sent as an attachment unless your organization has a limit on the file size, upon which you will only have the option to upload and share, and that attach will not be an option anymore. On the other hand, if I were to try and attach something, the default behavior is the file will be uploaded into your OneDrive and then shared with the individuals with whom you intended to share. So that's the default behavior within Teams. Now, this here, the loop component that you create, is somewhat unique. Meaning, if you started the loop component within a chat, a direct message with someone, then that will be created again and stored in SPE, SharePoint Embedded, under the hood, but there is a piece of it, the definition of that file will be stored within your OneDrive, just like your Word or PDF or an Excel sheet. Creating a loop component then behaves in a similar fashion to attaching a file from your local drive. Only a definition file, if you like, is stored within your OneDrive, whereas the content itself is stored in SPE. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be diving deeper into the aspects of the orchestration and how the loop components operate and so on and so forth. But for the time being, you should understand that what you create here in a direct message is stored in your OneDrive. Let's leave it at that for the purposes of this discussion. So what is this then loop component that I keep talking about? Actually, before I do that, let me go back to my discussion around Copilot. Copilot has had so many different iterations, so many different branding changes. We had Bing Copilot, we had Copilot Chat, we had Copilot for 365, which we still do have. There's a licensed version and a free version. So right now, it's just Copilot 365, but there's Copilot for M365, which is a licensed edition that you have to pay for. Last time I checked, it was $20 US a month, unless you have special arrangement with Microsoft. And I'm no licensing expert, full disclosure there. And then there is the Microsoft 365 Copilot for all. And that is what you're looking at here. So if you, as long as you have some M365 tenant with a license of some sort, you can log in, and when you go to Microsoft 365, you're going to end up with something that looks like this. And that is the classic chat window that we know and love, but there's a whole bunch of stuff happening. One of the biggest changes that took place recently is, 2025 has been dubbed the agentic year, everybody's going on about agents, and I've got a series of lectures on that side of the story. Not necessarily dedicated to 365, but overall in the AI agentic side of things, which I dabble in and a passion of mine. So if you're interested, you can check those out as well. To Loop and its relationship to Copilot. In Copilot, I'm gonna save myself some typing and save you looking at my typos and so on, and I'm gonna pick one of those canned queries and I go blah, and it says, hey, maybe you want to tailor it a bit more. And you can see here the agent is becoming more chatty and asks questions and so on to narrow down your preferences, and then produce, sometimes can be too chatty. As you can see here, it finally generated some output for me. Now, one of the things that you probably already know with Copilot and other chatbots is that the output can be a bit ephemeral because it's Gen AI, it's generated, and it's generated on the spot based on the prompt and the answers you gave to the follow-up questions and so on and so forth. That can be a bit of an issue because, especially if you're using this information for a presentation or part of a research, or then you probably need consistent output, or you want to freeze that in time. And the classic way to do it is to copy that content, put it in OneNote or Microsoft Word or wherever you do your editing, and then share it from there. However, Microsoft has gone that extra step, and they made that readily available to us through this here. And this is called Pages. And when we say edit in Pages, what is happening essentially is it takes that content and pastes it in a page that is, you probably guessed where I'm going with this, it's a loop page. So far, we heard two terms. There's a loop component, which we inserted into a Teams chat or Microsoft Outlook's email message. And now there is a page. So how is a page different from a component? You'll be fluent in all that by the end of this course. But let's take this a little bit deeper. Right now, you can see here it says add to notebook. This feature is not quite there yet. As you can see, no notebooks yet, and I'm yet to figure out where to create a notebook. But because I've been through this journey with the loop integration since its inception, I'll share a few tips with you and I'll show you where this winds up. So let me get out of here. As you've seen, the page was created. I'm going to close out of this. And I'm going to go back on the left-hand side here of Microsoft 365 Copilot, and you will see that there's something called Pages. And what Pages does, let me just close out of this here. Underneath Pages here, you will see I have to refresh because I'm running in the browser, and this view gets stale a little bit if you don't refresh that browser page. So I'm gonna go down here and see, you can see that what I was just typing in there and getting as a result from Copilot. So here is the page, and it brought it out here in the edit session. Now, this is not a very meaningful title. Obviously, a few days later, maybe even in a few hours, you may not remember what this was about. So I'm gonna rename it to something more meaningful. Page created in Copilot, right? And I'm gonna give it a number 0 here just to designate it as such, and that is automatically saved in Microsoft Loop for us, right? And in here you can see the title is still old. You gotta refresh that to coax it to pick up the new title. And as you can see here, although I am on a decent network, still it's a bit slow. I've been doing SharePoint since 2001 from its early days, and we always had this saying, there is no instant gratification in SharePoint, because there's a whole bunch of infrastructure in the background that things have to be stored within and then syncing it back, and there's browser caching involved and so on and so forth. Never mind if you didn't get much of what I just said, but ultimately the point here is just be a little patient with it, because if you click on this and you go, oh, maybe I didn't save it. No, you did save it. Whatever changes you make here are gonna be automatically saved into SharePoint Embedded, so you don't need to fret about it. You just let it be, and in a little while it will sink in and everything will be hanky-dory. So having seen now 3 different ways to create loop pages and components. Pages primarily through Copilot, components by simply inserting a loop component through that little loop icon within Outlook messages or emails if you like, and the Microsoft Teams chat. So those are the 3 primary ways we create. You're probably glancing over it or using it without necessarily thinking too much about it, right? And you can see the title here says loop paragraph. Now that is where I want you to, if you're following along, please feel free. And if I were to click on this, it's gonna take you to a whole new location. Take a close look at that URL there. If you are interested in the nitty-gritty and under the hood, this is the URL that is being stored, through which is being retrieved, let's put it that way. As you can see here, that GUID, that is more than a GUID. This long string here represents the document, the permissions, all that stuff is embedded in this long string up here. And on the left here, you will see that the URL says loop.cloud.microsoft. And that's it. So in order to access loop, whether it is a paragraph / component or a page that is accessed through that single URL, loop.cloud.microsoft. You can also type loop.microsoft.com and it will forward you to this new URL. So if you had used loop in the past, you probably have the old URL, which they have forwarders that will bring you to the same spot as well. Right? On the left hand side here, you will see that there is a navigation bar. You're probably familiar with this already by now. Copilot and all other products have the same sort of navigation. If you come from a SharePoint background, then we used to call this the quick nav or the left nav, which is being adopted across the board throughout Microsoft 365 stack. SharePoint is the content for M365, and that is in large part true. Even Stream has moved into SharePoint. You will hear me referring to SharePoint quite a bit and perhaps singing its praises because I love it. It has paid my bills for so many years, and it is something I still do. So what is here? What is here is, let's start from the top. I'm going to come back to these 2 in a little while, but let's jump straight into this one here, recent. If I were to click on this recent, you will see that there's loop paragraph, which I just inserted in Microsoft Teams chat, and it's called people with existing access can use this link. That's what it says, and I didn't give it a name other than loop paragraph. I'm gonna come to this, but as you can see, everything you click will pop something up at you. Beware of that. We will hopefully demystify all those different moving parts, but this here is what you will see in Microsoft Loop, and of course, as you would expect it, the little logo here on the left of the browser title. And here on the top as well, you can see that says loop and that colorful loop logo there. If I were to change this title to say created in MS Teams, and it takes a few seconds to sync, and this here will be renamed accordingly, right? Again, it takes a little bit of time. You really have to be patient with that. If I were to go here, this is a test modified in loop proper and I go back to MS Teams, you will see that the little change that I added is indeed reflected in here. So what did I just do? Recap. I created a loop component in Outlook, and that was that. I created a loop component in MS Teams, and that's what we're still looking at here. I created a loop page using Copilot, and we'll come to that in a minute. But further, I took that loop paragraph or loop component, which I created in MS Teams, and went ahead and edited it, tweaked it within Loop itself. And the effect of that is, as you can see, was instantaneously visible from within the team chat. Let's say we were chatting back and forth, working collaboratively on a certain document. One could be in a team chat and another one could be in Loop, or multiple individuals could actually be accessing it through the Loop interface and modifying the document. So you can see the power of that. One might say, I can do that in Word or Excel. Yes, you can, of course. M365 is great that way. It has become this all-around co-author and collaborative tool. However, what is unique about Loop is that it enforces so many best practices that we have been advocating for over many years, primarily version control. That is really key, because how many times do we create version XYZ 15 dash final? You probably know that story. None of that nightmare. Version control in SharePoint, again, is great in that if you accidentally overwrite somebody's work or your own work, that you can go back and look at earlier versions and revert to that. Since I am talking about it, let me just show you where it is. As you can see, all the modifications that occurred and here are preserved, and I can simply go back to one of these and restore the changes, right? Or revert back to that addition. Of course, I can revert as many times as I want, depending on, not a very productive thing to do, obviously. But as you can see here, I reverted and reverted back, so I would expect those changes to be in place. Now, as you can see, after a little bit of time, that name change has synced, and on the left-hand side here, it's called Loop Paragraph created in MS Teams. If I go back to MS Teams right now, you can see that it still says Loop Paragraph, right? So those are little quirks that you have to be aware of, but ultimately you can rest assured that things are in sync. As soon as you make that change, it will be stored. Why you don't see it in the facade and the front end is primarily just a matter of synchronization between your client and the backend system. But whatever changes you make are indeed stored and preserved. The places you can create MS Loop components and pages are primarily Outlook and MS Teams. There are several others, of course, MS Loop, Microsoft Loop itself, as you will see shortly, but you've seen me edit within. And then there is the indirect creation of pages that happens via Copilot. Whether you have Copilot, the free edition, or you have Copilot, the paid edition for 365, they both create pages, and those pages will be surfaced over here. I mentioned that in Copilot, when you go to Pages and you open that page, and you can see here, if I were to refresh, you would expect that name to be fixed by now. You can see it said page created in Copilot 0, right? And that's the name that I gave it after I renamed it in Microsoft Copilot over here. So I'm going to go back to Pages. You can see that page created in Copilot 0. When you rename a page to something that's meaningful, it will hopefully trigger in your memory, what is this about? Or you just open it and you go ahead and check its content, right? Two different interfaces for Pages then. One is the Copilot, where you can still edit it and make amendments and so on and so forth, added in Copilot. Or an MS Loop, where if I go open this one here, you expect to see in a little bit that I modified that page. Oops, this one here. I modified that page there as well. As you can see here, added in Copilot surfaced immediately within MS Loop. So the takeaway here is that multiple user interfaces to modify the same component. Changes more or less reflected instantaneously. Some will take a bit longer than others, but in MS Loop, the changes will always be centralized and pooled in that location, and you expect to see them almost instantaneously. Imagine if you were a team of 3, 4, 10 people, and as we all know, post-COVID, a lot of us work on different schedules. We hardly meet in person, and collaboration in a virtual environment is an absolute make it or break it for businesses, right? And as you can see here, Loop is essential in facilitating that, furthermore in enforcing a lot of the best practices and saving us a lot of grief in the process. You've probably dealt with version control issues over time. But what really excites me about Loop, as I'm going to elucidate over the next few sessions, is this. And this list is growing. A year and a half ago, when this was in its early days, and there was hardly anything in here, it was limited, and this list is growing as integrations with external products go hand in hand with the enhancements in the product itself. And what I mean is a lot of these options here on the left and on the right did not exist in the last little while. You can obviously go and check out the roadmap to see what rich features Microsoft is working on to further enhance this amazing product that we call Microsoft Loop. I'm going to take a break at this point here, and we will pick up from where we left off in the next session. If you enjoyed this content, you learned a thing or two, please leave me a note, leave me a thank you, a thumbs up, whatever it is that we do these days. But ultimately, what drives me to share this is just the passion to share, and being a lifelong teacher, I like to teach, and it makes my day when I learn something new, irrespective of what is the subject, really. And I hope you enjoyed it again, and thank you, and I'll see you very soon.